Hello, welcome to the Past Marathon Linux edition. We're excited you could join us today for Janis Griffin's session, hi ho, SQL Server on Linux we go. The Past Marathon consists of 6 consecutive live webinars delivered by expert speakers from the past community. These sessions will be recorded and posted online after the event. You will receive an email letting you know when these recordings are available. My name is Tracy Baggiano. I will be the moderator today. I have a few introductory slides before I hand over the reins to Janis Griffin. Next slide, please. If you require technical assistance, please type your question into the question pane located on the right side of your screen and someone will assist you. This question pane is also where you may ask any questions throughout the presentation. Feel free to enter your questions at any time, and once we get to the Q&A portion of the session, I will read your questions out loud to the speaker. You are able to zoom in on the presentation content by using the zoom button located on the top of the presentation window. Note that there will be a short evaluation at the end of the session. Your feedback is important to us, so please take a moment to complete it. It will appear in your web browser at the end of the session. Next slide, please. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, Suzy, for their continued support of our event. With their help, PASS is able to provide another exciting virtual conference. Suzy and Microsoft have been working together for over 10 years. Over the past year, they have closely collaborated with the SQL Server team at Microsoft to bring SQL Server 2017 to the Suzy Linux Enterprise. Next slide, please. The PASS Career Center can connect you with your dream job opportunity. Utilize this resource to review posted jobs, create applications, post anonymous resumes, and more. Connect with a worldwide network of employers in multiple industries by visiting www.pass.org/careers.asp.x. Next slide, please. This PASS Marathon session is presented by Janis Griffin. Janis Griffin has over 25 years of DBA experience, including design, development, and implementations of many critical database applications. Before coming to SolarWinds over 10 years ago, Janis held DBA positions working with both real-time network routing databases and OLTP business-to-business applications. Without further ado, here is Janis Griffin with hi ho, SQL Server on Linux we go.
Okay, thank you, Tracy, for that introduction, and also I want to thank everybody for joining me today. I'm excited about talking about SQL Server on Linux. Many of you may not know, but I grew up on Linux, so it's fun to be able to take SQL Server and go back to Linux, if you will. The agenda we're going to talk about today, first I'm going to talk about why Microsoft decided to put SQL Server on Linux and Docker. And we're going to jump into the distributions, the different flavors of Linux you can put it on, as well as Docker. And we're going to talk about the architecture and get into a little bit of the licensing. And then we're going to jump right into installing, backing up, maintaining a SQL Server on Linux. And along the way, I'm hoping that some of you are new to Linux, so we're going to go through several Linux commands. We'll talk about the command line interface that Microsoft gives you on Linux, SQL CMD. It's a command line interface just to access the database, as well as other client connectivity tools that you can use. And then we'll jump right into a demo. Many of you may not know that Microsoft actually came out with a new tool called SQL Operations Studio. It was after PASS Summit. They've been working on it, but they didn't really have a name, and they actually now have called it SQL Ops. And so we'll go into that a little bit too. It's kind of a neat tool. Okay, so let's get started. I only have 45 minutes to do this, so I'm going to go kind of quickly through the slides because I'd like to spend more time on the demo. Excuse me. So first off, let's talk about why Microsoft put it on Linux. SQL Server has been around for 30 years, and it's done quite well on Windows. But IT landscape is constantly changing. Let's face it. There's public cloud, private cloud. There's, you still have on-premise, bare metal, but you also have these complex hybrid environments. And not only that, there's just a lot of operating systems. There's Linux, Windows, Mac. There's even older operating systems of Unix, and IBM iSeries is still around. Different languages, a lot of open source nowadays that can access many different databases, as well as open source databases. And not only that, there's multiple database types now. There's NoSQL versus SQL. So, this mix of environments is very challenging to IT, and they need the skill sets for these specific environments. And it can be quite costly to go hire somebody if you're going to move from, say, Windows to Linux. To reduce operational costs, or you're going to go to the cloud. So what Microsoft has done is they've decided to, make SQL Server, that's been around for 30 years, available across many different platforms. A lot of people know how to write the SQL Server. They got languages that are open source that sits on, Windows, Mac OS, Linux that can access SQL Server. So why not put SQL Server on other things besides Windows? So that's what they've actually announced, that they've committed to interoperability to open source. And if you think about it, 30-year-old database is enterprise quality. Now MySQL, Postgres, they're coming, and they're becoming more enterprise worthy, but SQL Server has been around and leads in performance and security. I've got a little benchmark here. If you download my slides, you can actually click on that and read about the performance. And not only that, the security is stellar. I mean, it supports single sign-on with no password, so it's a stable environment. When we talk about the architecture, what Microsoft actually did was rewrite SQL Server. In fact, it actually isolated all of SQL Server's code into a common place, and then it abstracted the OS from the SQL Server code. So if you think about it, now when you install SQL Server on Windows or Linux or whatever, that same code is the same code everywhere. The only difference is there's an abstraction layer called SQL Pal, and basically they put all those OS calls and abstracted it away from the SQL Server code and put that outside of it. So it's pretty neat the way they actually separated their code and architected it. As you can see there, the distributions that you can put it on. Red Hat is a popular one here in the United States. You can do the enterprise with a license. Oracle is a different flavor, but you can actually put it on Oracle Enterprise. 7.3 and above. CentOS is free, and as you'll see in the demo, I'm actually going to walk through how you set that up. SUSE, which is our actually helped today organize this marathon, so SUSE version 12 and above, and Ubuntu server workstation you can put it on. You can also put it on Docker, and Docker is basically a virtual container that is a further abstraction layer away from the OS, and it's a way to bundle up applications and all their dependencies into a container, and you can run it anywhere. You can run it on Windows, you can run it on Mac, you can run it on Linux. So it really does expand the whole footprint of where you can run SQL Server. Now there is a how-to setup here, a link that it really walks you through any of these distributions if you want to actually install SQL Server on any one of these Linux flavors, if you will. Licensing hasn't changed that much. It's still 3 main editions. Express is free, Standard, and Enterprise. However, since they've rewritten the code and they rewrote that SQL Server piece of it, they actually put all the functionality in all the editions. So as far as programming is concerned, and their thought behind that is develop the code once, and then you just purchase the edition you need in order to scale. So so what you can do is you can download the free version, the developer and test edition, and it includes all the enterprise features that you can actually develop on, and you can actually just port it to all the other editions. What's new is they actually came out, the same SKUs that you purchase when you purchase a license will go on both Linux and Unix. So you can decide later if you want to actually move to the cloud or what have you. The Standard and Enterprise, when you purchase it, you have an option to actually do the SQL Server software assurance benefits. It's an extra cost, but what it buys you is it gives you next version rights, as well as license mobility. So if you decide to go to the cloud and you actually go into third-party servers, you can actually use your own license. Also, if you have failover servers, it buys you that extra license. You don't have to pay for the passive server license. It's free. Enterprise, there's also some new features there too if you decide to do this software assurance benefits. There's machine learning for Hadoop. There's a blog there that actually goes into that, as well as a Power BI server. So the catch here with the SQL Server licensing is if you want this software assurance, you need to acquire it when you buy the initial license. It can't be added later. I'm not going to really talk about this slide. This is just a little more about that software assurance benefits. The one thing, there's a neat webinar out there that goes into licensing ad nauseum almost, but what you can do is you can actually watch that, and they actually have a limited time offer for Red Hat and Microsoft. There's a promotion going on through next June, so if you wanted to save some money, maybe you want to look at that promotion. I'm going to turn on my webcam. I forgot to turn it on, so bear with me a minute. Let's see if I can turn this on. I'm not sure if it says it's starting, but okay. Okay, so that's, kind of the architecture, quick view of the distributions and, the licensing. But now let's get into actually the meat of it. And if you're not familiar with Linux, what you need to know and get acquainted with quite quickly is the Linux directory structure. Now, it's kind of like Windows, except what you're looking at is you're looking at this very top root directory, which is a / and the root directory is where every single file, every directory starts, and that's the only difference really with the directory structure. There's a little bit behind about the disk too. I'll talk about it in the next slide, but root is a user. It's an administrator, if you will, equivalent to an administrator on a Windows box, and it's a super user. And only root has access to write in the root directory. Now the / it is not to be confused with the root's home directory. That's /root. So it's not the same as the top level directory of root. So kind of same word, kind of confusing that way, but you'll get used to it quite quickly when you start navigating around in a Linux box. Now, what's listed here on the sides is, of course, all the common directories that across all the distributions, there usually are these directories. There's a /bin directory that holds all user binaries. There's a /etc directory that has the configuration files. When you install SQL Server, what you're going to find out is the default is going to install in /var, and that's where all the variable files actually sit. Now, the files underneath the variable directory can grow. So the thing when you set up a Linux box is you want to be sure that you actually give yourself enough space in the /var, and you actually want to separate those on different disk partitions, because what happens is SQL Server will default its data and transaction log files into /var /ops/ms SQL directory, and it'll actually put it in a data directory underneath there. So they'll be conflicting if they're on the same drives. Same way with the log and config files are put there, as well as any system files and other database files. If you've got MySQL, Postgres, they all tend to try to install in the /var directory. /op then is where SQL Server application is put. So that's where the binaries and the libraries for my SQL Server sit. And so underneath the directory /op/ms SQL bin, the binaries, and then of course the lib there. A little more about Linux. A directory does not equal a drive, and I've got this picture here. If you're only familiar with Windows, you have the C drive, and it's related. It's devoted to a drive. You've got everything pointing to different drives at the actual different letters there. In Linux, it's not so. You can actually have one full disk or you can have many disk partitions, or you can have many disks that actually support this directory. And you can't really tell when you're looking at the directory structure. You have to actually use some disk commands in order to see whether it's a disk partition, another disk, another drive, all that information. So that's just a little nuance of Linux. So what I'm trying to say is, and when you install, you can do /var/op MS SQL data, and you can actually set that on a different device than your log directory or your transaction log directory. So that's some consideration you have to give when you actually do install. Now, by default, when you install, SQL Server will set up a MySQL user and a MySQL group. And that's automatically set up for you. The home for that is in /home. And the application files are then owned by the MySQL user and group. So just so you know that that's sitting out there and you can log in as it. Now, some commands still require sudo, and sudo is equivalent to run as administrator. Sudo means super user do, so just to help you remember that. But when you set up and install an instance, you will have to use sudo or be logged in as root in order to install that. Now, Linux is case sensitive, so lowercase hello world does not equal uppercase hello world, and the hidden files are always prefaced with a dot. And you won't see those if you do a directory listing unless you actually give an extra command to see all the files. And I've got a little example here of a .bash profile. And what that is your environment file in most of the Linux distributions. When you log into a terminal, this thing will be executed for you and set up your environment. Now, when you log in, typically the default shell that you're logging into is bash. And that was built from the old Unix Bourne shell with added plugins, so that's why it's called bash, born again shell, if you will. And this is, just a command language that you can use for scripting. You can automate different things by, putting in a bash script and then setting it into a cron. Cron is basically a way of automating, is a cron daemon that sits out there and actually will run different commands that are sitting in the cron utility. Here's just some useful Linux commands. I always use ls -ltra. ls is a listing of directories, just like dir is on Windows. I always use the long listing. I like to sort it and then reverse that sort. So I always get my newest file last. And then the -A actually gives you all the files, including the hidden files. So there's just an example there of me doing a long listing of /var/op/MS SQL. CD, of course, is not a new command, but notice that the way the / is in Linux, not the backward slash as in Windows. And then PS is a way to look at active processes. I always like to do the -EF to see every process, and then I like the full format listing, so I use the -F. So there's an example of me looking at a process list, and I do PS -EF, and taking that standard output, and that vertical bar there is known as a pipe. And so I'm taking the standard output and piping it into another command called grep, which is actually pattern matching, a command to actually search files or standard output for certain strings. So as you can see here, I'm grepping and looking for SQL. So what this is going to return me at the command line is really my process that's running SQL Server. Grep, like I said, is for pattern matching. History is another command that you can look at all your recent commands. And so here's an example of me looking at my past, commands that I entered on the command line, and then I'm piping that into grep, and I'm actually saying ignore the case, but look for MS SQL-conf, which is the utility that actually sets up SQL Server. And then finally, the last command I want to talk about is just man, and that's your help on a Linux machine. You can do man PS, and it'll come back and tell you all the options you have to show your active processes. There's also a top command, which is an interactive view. to see your processes, and that one's kind of cool. If I get to the demo and I remember to do that, I'll show you top. If you haven't used Linux ever and you want to get acquainted with it, a neat way to do this without having to set up a Linux box is you can download the CYG Win download, which is a great way to get familiar with Linux commands. You can actually run it at DOS, and it actually, you can use all these commands that behave like Linux, but look at your Windows box. So it's a great way to learn and get acquainted with some of the Linux commands. Okay, so let's jump into installing, and this is, I installed on CentOS 7. I actually helped with the beta when they came out with SQL Server, and you actually install in Ubuntu. But what you'll find out with the different distributions is they're not that much different. Each one has a little different flavor of how you download packages and how you install them. But other than that, you know, Linux is usually pretty similar. I chose CentOS because I had a VM that was already set up as CentOS, so I decided to install on that. If you've not ever logged into a Linux box, I like Putty. It's a free download that you can download, and actually it gives you terminal windows that you can set up. And the reason why I like Putty is because I can actually change the colors, I can change the font. It's kind of a nice little utility to use and quickly set you up terminal sessions. And that's what you see in my slides. These are just terminal sessions that I like. I don't like black terminal sessions, so I always change the colors. But anyway, to install, you just log in as root, or you can sudo and do sudo and just download. And this curl means it's going out to the internet, and it's actually doing, you know, getting this package from Microsoft, and it's actually putting it into this repository, and we're calling it mssql-server.repo. And it actually does that within seconds. And then to install it, you just do sudo yum. Yum is Red Hat's, I think it stands for Yellow Dog Update Modifier. I don't know. Anyway, it's a way to install packages on Red Hat. And so yum install actually installs the SQL Server package. And what it does, and you can see that I'm installing it here, it goes out and looks for dependencies, and then it basically you know, tells you that it downloaded it, gives you the size, and it lists, you know, what it's done. It does a check. It lists errors here, or it says it's complete. And then it actually gives you additional instructions. So this actually tells me to go run that mssql-conf utility to actually create the instance. So basically we go do that, and it's done. You know, it takes you less than just a few minutes to set up SQL Server on Linux, and it's just really quite nice. This utility, mysql-conf, basically you can actually it has quite a few commands to actually maintain a configuration file out there, but the main command is of course setup, and what that does, you have to do sudo or be logged in as root, but it'll actually prompt you for which package you want. Whether I just chose developer, but if you choose a paid version, you'll have to have a license to enter in, and then it prompts you to accept the license, and then asks you for the SA password and to confirm that. And then that's all there is to it. It just says it's starting server, so the SQL Server. So pretty simple. Like I said, it just takes minutes. Now, you have to, you know, to look and see SQL Server, you can use systemctl. That's a CentOS command to actually see status, or you can start and stop the service. So I just did the status here, and you can see the two process IDs that it's set up for me, and then it actually tells you what's running, what's not, and all the SPIDs that are associated with that. So just some good information there. After you've installed SQL Server, then to actually access it on Linux, you have to install the tools. And so again, I'm just using curl to go download the tools package, which is called prod.repo, and I actually call it msprod.repo in my repository, and then I basically just install that. And it goes out and looks for dependencies, as well as, you know, tells the size and all that, and then says it's installed. So basically what this buys you is it buys you the SQL CMD command. and the BCP command, which is an import-export utility into SQL Server. So I didn't really give any slides to BCP. I figured that's pretty self-explanatory. SQL CMD then is just your command line interface. So you can see here I'm doing a SQL CMD minus S. You have to give it the IP address. You can do an IP address or comma a port if it's not the standard port. It defaults to 1433, but if you call it another port, you'll need to use the comma port number. And then you can do -U and put your username now. You can put -P here in caps and the password, but if you do that, then it's on the command line and people are standing behind you, they can see it. If you don't put that, you're prompted for the password. So that's the example here. And then I'm just at the command line in SQL Server, so it's just common SQL Server queries at this point. I'm selecting name from sys databases. You can see I actually connect to a test. A little nuance here is you always have to type go. I think if you do a help on SQL CMD, they might be able to change that to some other prompt. But, you know, that's basically from there, it's just SQL Server. I showed you a little example here because you can script with bash, and you can actually put the SQL command in a script, and you can actually do things like run other scripts, or you can actually run a query on the command line and then automate that script. So this is just an example of a -I of, you know, reading a script and then putting output to I'm reading weights.sql, and then I'm actually putting it into a file called weights.log in the output. So you can see I just ran that, and there's my log file that's telling me what it did. Notice it doesn't, you know, I didn't put the password there, so it, of course, doesn't have the password in it. The install doesn't install SQL Server Agent by default. So it does come with the download of the SQL Server, you know, SQL Server. So you first have to install SQL Server, and then you don't have to go get the copy of SQL Server Agent. You just have to install it. So again, you just install it using yum, and then the caveat here is you have to restart it in order for SQL Server to see it, and before you get in Management Studio. You can't really do with anything with the agent on the box except you know, use it remotely from Management Studio. I actually thought it'd be interesting to do Docker. What Docker is, it's actually images. They're actually containers that add an additional layer of abstraction to the operating system level. So it basically is a container that holds any application and all its dependencies, so you don't really, you know, you can isolate it from the operating system, and so it's very portable, very flexible to move from cloud to bare metal, all that. So I thought it'd be interesting to set up a Docker image, and the reason why I like Docker, in fact I almost like it better than to install on Linux, because I can have multiple instances by using several Docker containers. So to use it, you have to of course download from Docker, and when you can use it on Mac, Windows, and Linux. My example is going to be on Linux, but so you just install it, and it default it installs in /var/live/docker. However, you can actually decide to put that on different disks and actually separate again the data files from the transaction logs. I did it because I had a VM already created. I didn't want to mess with the disk, so I just created Linux symbolic links and moved the directories and then linked to them. So you can do that as well. Like I said, I like it because I can run multiple instances on Linux by setting up multiple containers. To download, you can do a webgit and actually get it from Docker, and there's the address there. To install it, again, you just do yum install and give it the package, and then just start it. And there's a little test out there that you can test it to see if it's working. And so I just did sudo docker run hello world. I probably didn't have to use sudo there, but anyway, it just comes back and says, yeah, it worked, and then gives you references, you know, further information about it. Okay, after you get your container and a Docker installed, then you can actually create a container. And SQL Server, Microsoft has actually created, you know, install for that. So I just bring that down and I do sudo docker pull at Microsoft, and I just get the latest version of SQL Server. And just to create a SQL Server instance and with a container, I do docker run, I accept the EULA, and I give it the password that I want for my SA, and then I give it the port that I want it to listen on, and then I name my container, and in this case I named it SQL1. The volume, I gave it a volume. If you don't give it a volume, it'll try to do this blind mount, which is not very flexible. It's kind of best practice to always put your files in a volume. So, and as I just create a volume, it does it on the fly. And I kind of have a little standard where the name of the container and the volume name I make the same. It's just easy that way to quickly identify and know where you're at. And then you just install it. So that's it. And then you've got an instance of SQL Server running. To access, you can use Docker commands. I'm doing here an exec. I'm saying go to container 1 and issue this command. Now you have to give it the full path because Docker doesn't understand where the application is so that it has in its container. So you have to give it the full path, but then you just sign in using SQL CMD. Now what I did and what I like to do is I installed the tools locally on Linux, and so I could just access it via SQL CMD, and that's me accessing that container. Notice I don't name the container because of course the OS doesn't know anything about containers. It just knows that, go to this port and start talking SQL Server. Here's some useful Docker commands, but for the sake of time, since I only have 45 minutes, I listed here to be complete, but I'm not going to go through them here. I have examples and several slides, but I'm trying to get to the demo because I think that'll be more interesting than looking at slides. The Docker PS command, if you say -A, it'll list everything, even the inactive ones. But notice my two containers, I got SQL1 and SQL2. There's two instances out there running. It's been up 6 days when I took the snapshot. My status is that it's up, and then there you can see the port that you should access it with. You can also get the same information if you do Docker container lists, or if you do Docker volume lists, it'll show you the volumes. And if you actually do an inspect, it'll actually show you where your data is sitting. And I'll show you that when I get to the demo. This is just accessing the different containers with Docker, and I give it the container name and do, just get into SQL CMD. And you see my server name here starts with DC4. Then I exit out of it. And I actually log into SQL 2 container, and you can see a different server name here starts with C40. So just all in the same box. To back up and restore in Docker, it's real easy to do. You can make a directory. And underneath this container, all the files sit. So when you create a volume, it'll sit all in this one area. And so when I do exec SQL1 maker, then this is going to be underneath the SQL1 volume that I created. So I actually put if you don't make a backup directory, it'll actually put it in the data directory, and I don't like that. So I always create a backup directory. Then you can download and play with it. There's an example database out there called Wide World Importers off of GitHub. And so I just downloaded that and I put it into a file called wwiback. And then basically I just use SQL commands to list the files in that backup. And this is a little Unix way of formatting that. So when I actually look at it, it formats it nicely here, showing me the logical name and of course where it used to sit. But when I back it up, I'm going to direct it to where I want it to go. Now, again, I should have actually put my transaction log and separated it out. It will default in data if you don't. I should have actually put that somewhere else on another disk. In a production environment, I definitely would do that. Backing up, is real easy. Again, you just do SQL CMD and give it the backup command. The thing about Docker containers is that the OS knows nothing about them. And so if you were to remove a container, you would have lost all of your data. All of your whole SQL Server instance is gone. So when I back up, I think it's good practice to always copy the files out of the container and keep them on your box. And you do that by a Docker command of cp, which is copy, and I give it the volume name and the location, and then just put that out on another disk away from the Docker environment, just in case. Always better be safe than sorry. Okay, finally, the connectivity tools. We talked about SQL Command and BCP a little bit. You can always connect remotely from Management Studio. And now that in 2017 they separated that as a different install, it doesn't come with SQL Server anymore. And so basically when you download it, though, it does include PowerShell. And so either remotely PowerShell or Management Studio. You can actually use Visual Studio Code, and you can install that Linux. There's a how-to that I've listed here if you want to get involved in that. And then there's SQL Server data tools that you can build a project on Windows and then deploy it to Linux. So that's some tools that you can use. And then finally, the new tool, the SQL Operations Studio, which you can install on Linux, Windows, and Mac. And so there's a GUI interface, much like SQL Server, as you can see in the example, or Management Studio, as you can see in the example here. I'll go into that when we get to the demo. Finally, all the languages that you can port across Windows, Linux, and Mac I've listed here. There's a neat article that you can link to here that actually gives you step-by-step how-to in each one of these languages on Linux or Windows or Mac. So it's pretty comprehensive if you want to look into learning that. Okay. I'm not sure why we're hung up here. I'm having a little difficulty, sorry. I wanted to get to the demo. Okay, I'm going to close my PowerPoint presentation because I want to get to the demo anyway. Hopefully, well, okay, so I don't know, I came back. Okay, hopefully you're all still with me. Here, I just want to show you, here's my Docker installation. I have, if I do Docker PS here, whoops. You can see I have 3 containers out there. One is named test container, and then I have SQL 1, SQL 2. Now I can actually do Docker, and I can do volume list. And like I said, I only have 2 volumes. And I'm not sure what I did with this one. This test container, when you install SQL Server on Docker, it doesn't come with a SQL agent. And so the only way to get the SQL agent in these is you have to build your own Docker image. So that was kind of a neat exercise to do. It's easy enough to do to build your own image and include the SQL Server agent. That's what the test container is. Now, as you can see here, if I cd to /var/lib and do an ls minus ltra, because I like that command, you can see that this one, there's where Docker is installed, but that's where I created a symbolic link to actually put it in /home. So if I actually cd into Docker here, I'm really looking, if I do a df minus k, you can see I'm actually in /home, and that is actually a different partition than my root partition, so I've actually moved it and split it out. But if I actually go into some of these, you can actually get into volumes. Oops, sorry, typo. And do a listing. You can see that there's my 2 volumes of SQL 1, SQL 2, and I've cd to if I cd to SQL 1, you can see there's a data directory. Now, if I just do an ls, and let's just do star of that, you can see I have a backup directory, I have a data directory, and a log directory. Now, I really should have an LDF directory too for my transaction logs. The log directory here will be all of your SQL Server logs, including your extended events sessions. The system health package is actually those are where the file sits there. Now, when I cd, I am as the root, so if I actually see where I'm at my home directory. What I did was I created a little script called create Docker shell. And just to show you how easy it is to create it, I'm going to actually VI that first just to show you the file. And it's just basically a bash script. And I'm echoing and prompting for the name of my container, the port that I wanted to listen on, and the SA password. And then I basically just pass what I've entered into the run command. And notice my name here is I'm also calling the volume the name too. So it goes out and creates the volume at the same time. It just keeps it consistent to actually run it that way. So if I actually run this file then, it's going to prompt me. I'm going to create a SQL 3 container, and I'm going to have it listed on port 1405. And Docker likes to default to 1433, so if I don't put the 1433 here, it'll actually try to listen on 1433. And I'm already have a SQL Server on 1433, so it would have a conflict, so I don't do that. So then I can actually do give it a password. And I'll do my secret. Let me see. Secret. Everybody has their, hopefully nobody uses this. Okay. And basically it just created it. So it's just that quick to create an instance. Now, if I do a Docker PS, now you can see there is my SQL 3 container. You can actually see the port of 1405, and so for me to go access that now, I just do SQL CMD, and give it the port, and minus U, login as SA, minus P, and of course, since you've all seen my password, and this will take a little bit to set up and open up the port, but it should log me in. Oh, an error, taking a little bit. There we go. So now I can select add server name, and there you go. I can create a database. Let's just create a database, Jan. Okay, so that kind of gives you an idea of how that works. Exit out of there. Whoops, exit. CentOS, I have another actual one that's on CentOS. This is just, not a Docker container, but if I actually grew up for SQL, you can see my process here. I have two processes. I've got some other things running out there too. I actually have SQL Ops loaded on this box. What you find, I actually loaded on Windows. I like that a little better because these are VMs, and I have to access SQL Ops via the container or the console on vSphere, so it's easier just to do it on Windows. But you can see that I do have SQL Ops running out there as well. One thing you can do is you can do a top, and this is that interactive process. And you can see I can do certain things. You can give certain commands here that will actually sort by CPU. It'll sort by all those different things. But you see all the processes out there running. If you do a Control-C, that'll take you back to the command line. Okay, so that's Linux, but now maybe I want to access it via, Management Studio. So here you can see the three here that I have been accessing. Let's connect to that new one. And so I'll just connect there. And I hope it remembered my password. I don't know if we'll see. Well, that isn't the password, sorry. I have to remember my own password. Okay, and there it is. I just connected to it. Now notice that the SQL Server agent is disabled. That's because Docker does not the container that's sitting out there that you download, the image that you download, it doesn't have it in it. So you have to build your own image. And I did that here. Am I connected where you can see that? Yeah, 1409. I actually connected to that port, and I did that test container, and you can see I actually was able to create my image, add that SQL Server agent, and I actually have backups automatically installed there. Of course, you can create your backups via cron job on Linux too. You don't always have to use a SQL agent, but if you're more familiar with a SQL agent, that's one option for you. And then everything works. There's a query store, everything's right in there for you to access your SQL Server on Linux. The one thing that's kind of neat is the SQL Ops. And like I said, you download SQL Ops, and you have to kind of put it in your path. I happen just to be sitting in the directory, I think. But you just type SQL Ops at the prompt, and this will come up. And you'll get to see this interface. What's nice about SQL Ops, it's not a complete version like Management Studio. You can't do a lot of things. You don't have SQL Agent. You don't have a lot of the management objects there. But what you can do is you can actually modify the dashboard. And it has a neat manage utility, and you can actually create widgets and actually have a common dashboard. So if I were to connect here, just see if I can do this. It's a little slow. While we wait for this, Tracy, I don't know if there's any questions, but maybe we can start taking questions. I know I don't want to run out of time and not answer any questions.
Yeah, there's a few questions. A couple questions are, will you be making the slide decks available anywhere?
Yeah, will you? I guess that's a question for Pass. I know I sent them to you. Do you have any place to post them? If not, I can make them available on our SolarWinds site. Or I can send them to you if you want to email me. My email address is janis.griffin@solarwinds.com, and I can share them with you that way.
Okay, I will post your email as a question to that. Another question was, do you have to install your data in the default directory or your data files in the default directory, or can you specify different locations for your logs and your data?
You can move them after you install them, but really when you use the command, I don't believe there's any way to actually tell it where to go. So you can definitely move them afterwards. But when you install, there's really no way to do that.
Okay. Someone commented you did get Yum correct. It is Yellow Dog Updater Modified.
I'm sorry?
Someone did comment that you did get Yum correct. It's a Yellow Dog Updater Modified.
Yeah.
Someone.
I don't know how they came up with that name, but yeah, it is. It's the way you install packages on Red Hat.
Someone asked, can you back up to a URL?
Backing up to a URL?
Yes.
I've never done that. On Linux, you typically back up to, you just back up to a file. I've never backed up remotely to any place. So I can't really answer that. I apologize.
That's all right. Do you have to change the MS SQL user password after the install?
It prompts you during the install for your password. You don't have to change it because it doesn't store it anywhere. I mean, it actually just uses it to create the the user, and it has that password. But yeah, you can definitely change it. But it prompts you during the install for the SA password.
Okay. How do you manage OS system and security updates on Linux as opposed to Windows?
OS system updates. Well, you usually with Yum, you would install, and like for CentOS, I was on version 7.0, and I wanted the latest version, so I just went to CentOS site and got the latest and did a Yum install. And it basically goes out and it figures out all the dependencies and does it for you. Rarely does it error unless it has a dependency it can't resolve. And so then, of course, you have to work through the errors. But it's pretty straightforward with Linux. Linux is an old operating system that they've got the install packages down, and it's not as difficult as what sometimes Windows can be, and taking time and actually getting that done. So I hope that answers.
Okay, and final question I got for now is there a way to upgrade from developer to enterprise?
You should be able to just by, well, I don't know if you'd have to back up and move over to do that. I can't answer that. I usually use developer, and if I got an enterprise, I usually just recreate and actually restore my database over there.
Okay, a couple more questions came in.
Okay.
Does it create the threads or process for SQL Server processes?
Create the threads?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you, that's a good question, because let me bring up my terminal window here. And actually, I don't know why I went dark. That's funny. Oh, here, I'm in the wrong session. Let me actually get out of my remote desktop. Okay, so on a Linux box, when you set up a process, it has what it likes to set up as lightweight threads. And so if you do a man of PS, you can actually see all the threads associated with the SQL Server process. And I believe it's with a minus L. I don't know if it's a capital L. And it's not coming to my mind right now, but actually there is a way to view the different threads, and that's how SQL Server runs. It actually runs underneath one process, but in that process you can have a lot of threads connected and distributed with that process. And I wish I could find that. Let me just try to do a PS minus. I think it's minus capital L. Yeah, so if I were to look, you can see all of my lightweight threads here that are connected to that one process. It's all the same process. It's my same process ID, but it has a different thread ID. So yeah, if you do a PS minus EFL, capital L, that actually will list all the threads underneath. Hopefully that answered.
Are there any specific wait events that are for Linux?
I haven't seen any. In fact, that's a good segue into the SQL Ops tool. I actually created this widget on top of the query store. And in version 2017, they actually put waits in the query store. So now we have some decent information about the resources that are being used up at each database. And with the SQL Ops, what you can do is I can do a control comma. And what this does is basically opens up my user settings, and you can see here it shows you the defaults, but you can actually edit this and add new widgets. So I did just that. If you go down to the bottom here, you can see at the database level I added several widgets. I added the slow query widget, I added my widget, and with is actually doing a count. I actually asked, oh no, this is a weight query. And then I added database weights, and this is, that one that's actually giving me the detail. And then finally I did just a custom widget that gives me active sessions. So you can do all kinds of neat things with SQL Ops. And so, for example, when I'm at Advanced Work, I can do manage. And you can query in this tool as well, and you can see things that you can see. Here's my weights. My top weight for my database AdventureWorks is on disk. And basically the query store has like 23 weight categories, and so my top weight, which isn't that much, it was 11 milliseconds, then followed by CPU memory, network, and some preemptive going on there. Now if I were to go to this one and manage it, you can actually see it has a different weight. In fact, it's more intensive on CPU. I can actually get more information on this by running the query. Here I can actually run the query. Here's my, I've got 4 active sessions. These are all widgets that I created. When you download, SQL Ops, the only thing that's sitting here, I believe, is just the task that you can back up, restore, you can configure, you can do a new query. They do give you table sizes. I don't believe I put that one in. And then, of course, you got the databases here that you can do. So real easy to do. If you do a new query, what I like about SQL Ops is it does, you can do file, open, and here and just run that weight query that I had out there, and this is just going through the query store, and I can run it. But what's nice about it is it retains your history. So if I wanted to say, okay, I want to run this query here, I can just do that, and it'll connect and open it up and run the query at the same time. So it's some niceties that Management Studio doesn't have, but again, it doesn't have all the features that Management Studio has.
Okay, a couple of questions around Windows logins. One, can you have them?
Yeah, you can have a domain. It has domain or Active Directory. Active Directory is a little more difficult to set up on Linux than I would say Windows, but it can be done.
That was the next question, was how to get it to participate in Active Directory authentication.
Yeah, I haven't played with that a whole lot to answer. I'd be giving you a wrong answer if I gave you that, but I believe it can be done. I haven't, like I said, I didn't get that far into my demo to look, but it's something I definitely will look into after this.
Yeah, understand. It's only a short presentation. Can you send a SQL command into a background process?
Into a background process?
Yeah.
I guess I'm not understanding how that would work. If you're looking at background processes, you can actually, query the DMVs and see all the background processes.
I guess they're wanting it not to run interactive at the command line.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, yes.
That's my guess.
About that. Yeah, it is, and I should have been thinking that way. And I should have showed you that because I talked about cron, and you can actually, on a Linux box, get into cron. You do a man on cron. Cron's going to tell you about the daemon. It's going to tell you how to actually start and stop it and set it up. And I do believe, let me see if I have cron tab out here. You have a couple commands. You can look to see if you have anything in cron. And so here is my cron tab. Sitting under root, and I've got some loads that are actually running. And these are scripts that basically I'm calling. I've got a load.shell and a load2.shell that are basically accessing a database and putting on a load. And basically they're logging out to this file. To put it in the background, because you don't want to see it running and you want to run it inactively, I can just do this. I can actually cut this command right now. Although it's out there running, I could run it in background just by running this, because this, putting this to 2, and then there's an error, and then putting it in the background is all this, what this means right here. So, I could actually run it here and not know that I'm running it until I log out, and then of course, I would have killed the session if I did that. But you have cron to automate, so you can back up via cron. My little weights query that I had out there, I don't know if I had that, I don't know if I have it here, but I could put that in cron and run that. So you can script virtually everything in Linux. It's it's one of the neatest operating systems to do that. You can get quite specific in what you want to do with it as well.
All right, we have a few more questions, but I believe we're up against our time limit for the next session. So they will send over these questions to you, and you can, I guess, do a blog post on them or try to answer people's questions. I know one of these questions is about
Okay, great.
high availability. The next session is on high availability. Alan Hurt's doing a session on that next for the person who asked that. And there's one about using Perfmon. There's one session on performance later on today that you may be able to watch for that. So that may help with that question. So beyond that, there's a couple other questions. But and you had a comment that you did a great job.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining me. I hope you got, at least thing I would like you to take away is get excited about SQL Server on Linux. It's something new. It's a new skill that we can, you can put to your toolbox. I'm excited about it. So you guys have a great day. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.